Okay, today I'm going to rank basically every watch brand I can think of and tell you whether I think it's a good watch brand or not. I'm pretty sure this is something you're not supposed to do on Watch YouTube because probably there's going to be a lot of people mad at me after this one. Anyways, let's go for it. Hey guys, this is Dave. Welcome back to Just the Watch, and this is part 2 of my watch buying guide for beginners. So this is a guide primarily for beginners. If you're more advanced into watch collecting, you're probably going to have fun watching this because you'll see what I think of different brands and you'll get to argue with me in the comments. So we'll see how that goes. But for the beginners out here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rank all of these brands into 4 categories. I'm going to have an A, B, C, and D tier. And then kind of a wild card tier as well. Okay, I'm going to cut in here a little bit. I do want to clarify that this is a list of affordable brands, so I'm not going to be covering anything. Okay, going to cut in here real quick. I just want to emphasize that this is a beginner list and that this is going to be covering affordable watch brands. So if a brand focuses on watches above the $500 range, they're probably not going to be featured on this list. That'll be for another time. Okay, moving on. Now, before we jump into the tier list, which I know is where everybody wants to go, and feel free to skip ahead to that. But for those of you who are really beginners in here, I want to talk just briefly about what types of watch brands there are out there, because there are 4 main types of watch brands, and what you can expect from these 4 different types of brands really varies a lot. So the first type of brand that's out there is a major watch brand. Think Seiko or Timex or Hamilton. These are watch brands that have been in business making watches for a long time. That's what they focus on. That's what they do. Second one is a newer category, and these are micro brands. Now there's a lot of variability here. It's like now basically anybody, like I could make a watch. I could make a watch brand. I could launch it on Kickstarter and I could start selling it. And there's some micro brands that are amazing and producing incredible watches for the price. And there's some that are out there that are fake companies that are pretending to sell watches that they're never going to deliver. So this is a category where there's huge variability. However, I think in general, there are a lot of great options in here. And if you're new to watches or not into watches, but just looking for a watch and don't know anything about watches, you probably don't know anything about any of these micro brands. So they're not going to feature too much on this list because primarily this is, again, a list for beginners. So I want to talk about the brands that I think people probably will recognize. However, I will give you some recommendations of micro brands to check out if you are new into this at the end of this video. Third category, fashion watch brands. Now these are watch brands that are primarily fashionable. Think like the Old Navy or Gap of the watch world. Kind of like the fast fashion sort of scene. They're watches that are meant to look good on your wrist, to match your outfit, to be kind of disposable. Oftentimes you're going to pay kind of a premium to get the name and the fashion, and maybe the quality of the watch is going to be slightly lower, or a lot lower depending on the brand. I would put like Michael Kors or MVMT in this kind of category. Finally, the third category is Chinese watch brands. These have really been blowing up in the last couple of years, and there's a lot of Chinese brands out there, some of them offering absolutely insane value for the specs that they're offering, and others just being cheap watches. And they're starting to creep into Amazon, so I'm going to mention some of those, but those are mostly going to factor into the wildcard tier on the list. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's jump through the list, starting with the A tier. Pretty much safe watches to buy no matter what. Okay, and these are in no particular order. They're just the order that came to my head. But yeah, so number 1, Seiko. Seiko is a great brand. They make really reliable watches. They're starting to get a little bit more pricey and expensive, but even still, generally speaking, if you see a Seiko watch, if you like the way it looks, and you can afford the price, you're probably going to be in good shape buying it. They have a huge catalog, a watch for any kind of person, so lots of great options there. Citizen, very similar to Seiko. I love their Eco Drive line. They do amazing solar powered watches, and they do a huge range of watches from dress watches to dive watches to GMT watches. They all tend to be fairly high quality, really reliable, great brand. Orient, this is one that not as many people know of. It's kind of Seiko's little brother. Seiko and Orient are both owned by Epson. I believe Orient does almost all of their manufacturing in Japan. And like Citizen and Seiko, Orient also makes their own movements, which is usually a good sign. And of the major Japanese brands, I think they tend to offer the best value. So they're definitely one to check out. If you see a watch from Orient, it's probably going to be a pretty good value. Okay, moving into some Swiss brands. Hamilton, really a darling of the watch world. Just really classic designs. They were originally an American company. They're now a Swiss company. They make really high quality watches. And again, kind of same thing. In this category, if you see a Hamilton watch and you buy it, most people love the Hamilton watches that they get. They tend to be a little bit higher priced than the Japanese watches that we mentioned so far. Certina, not quite as popular as Hamilton. Again, another Swiss brand. Certina is known for their waterproof watches, so they do a lot of watches that even like their dress watches are highly water resistant, so very durable watches, but still a lot of very classy looking pieces, and they're one that I'm kind of starting to like more and more. Okay, let's go to some of the more budget ones. Still A tier, Timex. So Timex makes a lot of very affordable watches. And if you watched my previous video, they don't have a lot of those things that I mentioned in that. Almost all their watches are mineral crystals. A lot of them are alloy cases. A lot of them are 30-meter water resistance. So a lot of times the specs are not that great on their lower end watches, but in that $30 to $50 price range, they still put together a really well-made watch that is going to last a long time, that has a lot of heritage and history behind it, and they have a pretty good reputation as far as backing up their products. So I still think that for the money that you get on most Timexes, they're generally a pretty safe buy. And finally, you got to mention Casio in this category as well. Casio has a huge range of watches. They're probably most famous for their G-Shocks. Basically, any G-Shock you get is going to be probably a great watch. Really safe bet with those. But they do so much more than just G-Shocks. But again, all of their watches are priced accordingly. So for the money you're going to spend on almost any Casio watch, if you like the way it looks, it's going to be worth the money that you spent on it pretty much 100% of the time. Okay, one more A-tier brand I forgot to mention is Tissot. Definitely want to put them in on this this part of the list. I think that they offer a lot of great value, really historic brand. Another member of the Swatch group, using a lot of ETA movements in their automatic pieces. So just really high quality stuff, and you can find a ton of great deals on the gray market. So I think they're another pretty safe one to go about. I would also throw Glycine in here at the end of the A tier. I don't have a lot of experience with Glycine. I've heard a lot of good things. I'm interested in checking them out in more detail, but from what I hear and from what I look at on the specs and research, they seem to be a pretty safe bet as well. All right, let's move down into the B tier of watches. So these are brands where some of their watches are good or great watches, and other ones I think are, maybe ones you got to be a little bit more cautious about. And first one there I'm going to list is Bulova, which is a brand that I actually really like. There's a lot of Bulova's watches that I think are just really amazing watches. I own the Bulova Lunar Pilot, which I love. A lot of great history and heritage behind them. However, some of their models are also kind of expensive and maybe not for everyone, and they're ones that I kind of look at, I'm like, that's something I would kind of pass on. So they're definitely, I think, in this B list category where they're not as safe of a bet as these other brands that we mentioned. It doesn't mean that they're worse. It just means I think you need to exercise a little bit more thought before purchasing a Bulova watch. Okay, next let's talk about Spinnaker, which again is a brand where I have reviewed a lot of their watches on the channel, and a lot of their watches I really love, but some of their watches are, ones that I kind of would sort of pass on. So do your homework with Spinnaker, check it out, see if it's something that other people have liked or if they've had problems with or good experiences with. A lot of great watches from Spinnaker, but not all of them. Along those lines, Aviate. Aviate is a sister company of Spinnaker. Spinnaker makes dive watches, so watches for the ocean or swimming, sailing or whatever, kind of nautical themed watches. Aviate makes aviation themed watches. And they're very similar in everything that they do, just the type of watches that they make, the style is different. So everything I just said about Spinnaker pretty much holds true for Aviate. Okay, so now moving into some that are more kind of bleeding into this fashion watch territory. Jack Mason is one that I think fits into this B-list category. I have a Jack Mason watch. I got it on sale. I got it at a good deal, and I really like it. However, I think at their retail prices, some of their watches are not quite the greatest value. But even at their retail prices, I think if you really like the watch, if you're really drawn to the design of the watch, from my experience, they're not bad watches, but I think they are a good brand. I do like what they've been putting out. I like that they're from Texas, that the brand's based in America, and I really like their designs. Nixon, another one. This is a huge brand, one of the most popular watch brands out there, And, you know, again, I think Nixon is kind of in that same category where at their retail price, a lot of times they're overpriced for what they're offering. A lot of times you're paying extra for the brand, not for what the watch actually offers. But if you can find them on sale or at a discount, I think they make great watches. Again, Nixon's another one that they're a California brand, so they focus on tailoring to surfers and active people. So a lot of their watches have high water resistances. They tend to be pretty durable. And I've owned a couple of Nixon watches in the past. I've liked them all. So that's a brand that I'm pretty comfortable with. Okay, last one is probably the one I'm going to get some flack for, but I'm going to put Invicta down in this B tier as well. A lot of watch people absolutely hate Invicta, but primarily they hate Invicta because they hate the way Invicta watches look. They hate the style and the attitude. But people who like Invicta watches tend to swear by them. They actually have a fairly good reputation for durability. And I think as a watch company, they're not a bad watch company. So if that's your style, if you're into giant, blingy, shiny watches, Invicta offers a pretty good value for that, a pretty good build quality, and they're a fun one to go for. I think some of their watches can be sketchy. Both the design and quality can be a little sketchy, I think. All right, let's move down into the C tier watches. These are ones I think are generally overpriced for what they're offering. Now, a lot of these watches, if you find them on sale, which you often can find them on sale, they can be a pretty good price. And I'm going to go ahead and drop Movement right in here. Okay, the Movement I would consider a C tier watch. I think a lot of watch guys on YouTube would drop them all the way down to F. There's a lot of hatred for Movement out there. And here, okay, so here's the thing about Movement watches. This is the way I look at them. If you are into brand recognition, if you want a watch that other people are going to recognize and appreciate, Movement is going to give you that for among the lowest price you can find. Okay, so if that's what you're after, I think they are actually a great value. You're not going to get a great watch, but you're going to get a watch that looks nice and that other people are going to appreciate, and you're going to spend probably the lowest amount of money possible to get those two specific things. Looks nice and other people appreciate. Like, to me, one of the only watches I think has better name recognition than Movement is probably Rolex. Okay, like non-watch people that I talk to, they know two watch brands. They know Rolex and they know Movement. So if that's what you're after, yeah, just know what you're getting into. But sure, go for it. Okay, I'm gonna also throw Fossil here on the C tier. I think that they are a pretty cool brand, and I have, when I was a kid, I owned a Fossil watch. I loved it, banged it up, scratched it up, and got a lot of good wear out of it. However, I think that you can generally find better values from other brands. So again, this is like most of the watches in the C tier section. If you can find it on sale, if you like it, it's probably a pretty decent watch. And I think Fossil makes fairly reliable watches, so that's definitely a plus for them. So I would be comfortable with them for that. Generally, you're paying more for the name and the style than you are for the actual watch that you're getting. So also on the C tier, Skagen, throw them in there as well. Generally, I think they're overpriced for what they offer. You can find some of their watches for a pretty affordable price, and if you like the design and you can find a good deal, then I'd say go for it, but I definitely wouldn't pay what they're asking for a lot of their more popular pieces that are going out right now. Very basic designs, lots of mineral crystals at prices that they probably should be offering. Sapphire. Stuhrling Original, I'm going to put them on the C tier as well. Kind of an interesting one because I think they have a lot of really cheap watches that are kind of fun. Lots of homages, lots of really low priced quartz pieces that look pretty nice. And so I think if you're interested in a really low priced watch, like around $50-$60, the Stuhrling Originals that retail at that price, their quartz pieces in particular, I think are fine to pick up, and you can see a lot of them there. So if you want to try out a style or something like that, I think they're kind of a fun one to look at. I would stay away from a lot of their automatic movements though. I feel like they charge too much for what they're offering. They use a lot of Chinese-based movements, and at that price range, you can go direct to AliExpress and get very similar watches for a lot cheaper, and they're going to have probably the same quality that you would get from a lot of the Stuhrling Originals. They're charging over $300 for some of their automatic pieces, and for that money, I think you can get a watch with a much better movement in it than what they're offering. And I'll throw Akribos in here as well. Akribos 24. Their cheap quartz pieces are ones that are, again, they're cheap and they look nice, and I think if you're looking to try out a style or something like that, it's kind of a fun way to get your hands on something, but don't expect a very long-lasting watch out of that. And yeah, I definitely wouldn't be spending more than like $60, maybe $70 tops on an Akribos watch. Once you start going above that, I think it tends to, yeah, you tend to be much better off looking at different brands. But yeah, if you are looking for something ultra budget down in that range, I think you can get one and they'll probably last you a year or two. And as long as you have that expectation going into it, you should be fine. Okay, next, C tier, Calvin Klein. So big fashion brand name. I believe they're now owned, their watches are being manufactured, I think, by the Swatch Group, if I remember correctly, which means a lot of their Swiss-made watches are probably pretty well-made watches. That said, you're still going to pay a fairly large premium to get the Calvin Klein name on the dial. So you're probably not going to get a bad watch. You're probably just going to pay too much for an okay watch. And while we're talking about fashion watches, let's talk about Michael Kors. So yeah, I think in that you're paying primarily for the name. If you are interested in the name Michael Kors, then that will mean something to you. I don't even know who Michael Kors is, so it means nothing to me. And for the money that you pay, you're not getting a lot of watch for that. So yeah, unless you're interested in the name, I would stay away from them and put your money elsewhere. But yeah, if you like the name and you like the style, I would, sure, go for it. Yeah, so also to the C tier, I'm going to add the Fifth and Vincero. I think both along those same lines of movement. They make a lot of quartz watches that, tend to be very fashionable watches. And again, they're kind of like I feel like they're sort of like the Gap or the Old Navy of the watch world. Now, I will say there is an exception with the Fifth. Okay, because I'm actually wearing a watch from the Fifth right now. They recently started making some Swiss-made watches and started sort of expanding their catalog out of this fashion watch range into kind of real watches. And they look pretty good. I mean, this particular one is one, so I got this one for free. They sent it to me for free to review, but I get a lot of watches for free to review. This is one that I've kept that has become one of my go-to watches. And I've liked it more and more the longer I've had it. So particularly looking in their Swiss-made watches and their newer ones, I would definitely give those ones a harder look. And, I think I would definitely bump those up into the B tier. I think it's a much safer buy for those ones than like their fashionable watches. Anyways, that's just my sort of opinion with the Fifth. Okay, so that's going to finish up the C tier. Let's move on to D tier. These are ones I think you really got to be careful of. Because I think that their advertising is a little bit deceptive. Okay, first off, Daniel Wellington, huge watch brand right now. And yeah, just looking at the specs of what they're offering, I really think Daniel Wellington, you're pretty much entirely paying for the name. The watch itself is probably about a $50 or $60 watch. Okay, that's what I said, probably worth 50, 60 bucks. Maybe 70, maybe $70 if I want to be generous. And then they charge you $200 for it. Okay, and that's because of the name. If you are interested in a Daniel Wellington, look at the Tissot every time. It's basically the same price, but they're going to give you a sapphire crystal, probably higher water resistance, and it's going to come from Tissot, which is a Swiss-made brand. Daniel Wellington, I believe, are made somewhere in Asia. Mineral crystals, very basic specifications. Again, you're paying almost entirely for the name. If you like that style of watch, there are better watches that have that style for the same price or less. So do some shopping around for alternatives, but I would not recommend going with the Daniel Wellington unless you specifically want the Daniel Wellington name. Kind of similar to Movement here. They have really good name recognition. A lot of people love them. If your circle of friends like Daniel Wellingtons and that's what you want, yeah, just know what you're getting into when you go to buy it. Okay, and last one on the D tier list, Fillipo Loretti. They've been contacting me to send me a watch, and I am curious to look at it, to review their watches. I haven't checked out their watches in person. I'm putting them down here based on their marketing, because I have seen a lot of their marketing, and a lot of their marketing to me is very deceptive. I think they definitely oversell themselves. They make some really bold claims about their watches that I don't think really hold true. So just be careful with them. And here's kind of the confusing thing with them. So I think they oversell themselves. But looking at the specifications of their watches and the designs of their watches, I think for the most part, they seem like decent watches for the money. So maybe, yeah, so it's primarily just their marketing thing. They're basically trying to convince you that they're selling you a watch on the same level as like Rolex for $200. which I think that's the kind of marketing claim that anyone would look at and know was completely false. But they're way overselling them. And some of the ways that they're doing it, I'm really scratching my head. I looked at one of the Facebook advertisements, ad campaigns that was selling Fillipo Loretti watches. And what it appears that they did is that they created a Facebook group that looked like a watch collectors group or a watch interest group that they manage, but then they made it look like it was a general watch group, and then they had that group run ads about how great their watches were. But it appears that the group is owned by Fillipo Loretti or managed by Fillipo Loretti, as near as I can tell. Now, I'm hesitant to say that because I can't verify that for 100% sure. But the research that I did looking at it, that's what it looked like they'd done. And that really struck me as disingenuous. And I've heard lots of similar kinds of things that they've been doing. So they're one that, again, I would definitely exercise a lot of caution when checking them out. Okay, so there's the main tier list. Let's run through some wild cards. So all of these are ones that you're going to find on Amazon, and they are pretty much all Chinese brands. Skmei, Burei, Infantry, Brigada, Star King, Boderry. So all of these watch brands, these are coming from China, and they're making their way into the Amazon market. And I've had a good amount of experience with a lot of these watches. You just have to be a little careful about what you're getting here. A lot of times these are very good watches, but they're not necessarily for everyone. On the lower end of the spectrum, things like Burei and Infantry and Brigada, very affordable prices, but oftentimes very cheap watches too. So I think in this kind of, you get a little bit more than what you pay for. So they can be fun ones to putz around with and to jump in and to try out. But don't expect to get something on the same kind of level of quality and especially warranty that you would get from a brand like Timex or Casio. The main thing to watch out for with Chinese watches is they tend to have less of a warranty support, after sales support, and they tend to have a higher incidence of failure than you would get out of a more established brand. So if you get a good watch from one of these brands, you tend to get a pretty great deal. But you're always taking a little bit of that risk with them, that maybe you're going to get one that's not going to last you more than a year, and then you're kind of stuck with it. So yeah, that's why I put them in this wild card list. All right, finally, let's wrap this list up with some micro brands that I really like, that I think are cool, and I'm going to recommend them to you guys to check out if you're new into watches. Now, all of these brands have inventory right now. So the biggest problem in the micro brand world is that many of these brands do not carry inventory. So they do a new release of a watch, and then they sell out within a month, and then you just can't get that watch anymore. So these are brands that tend to do a better job of keeping some inventory in stock, so you can actually go to them and check them out and consider buying them. Some of the best micro brands out there aren't in this category. You basically got to know the brand, you got to be waiting for them to release something, and you got to buy it within the first month or even week of it being released if you want a chance of getting one of those watches. Anyways, let's talk about these micro brands that I think would be good ones for you to check out. And these are all what I would consider to be very good brands, trustworthy, good track record, making good stuff. First off, Vario. I reviewed a lot of their products here on the channel, but they make watches as well. And yeah, their watches tend to be very nice, well thought out watches, high quality specs, and they're a good company to back them up. Tend to be more on the dressy side. So particularly if you're looking for something kind of dressy looking, they might be a good one to check out. Check out Boldr. They make more rugged watches, field watches, dive watches, that kind of thing. They have a very kind of specific design language, very cool kind of looking watches, and pretty good values for the specs that they offer. And they have a lot of watches in stock. They're pretty good at keeping things going. Axios. So this is a little bit higher end. I think they only have 2 models. They're both very good watches, right around $500 price range, but you're getting a lot of watch for that price. And you can, they're always in stock. And they do have stock right now, so they're another one to check out. A Swiss watch company. So this is one that's a very small micro brand, family-owned business, but they manufacture their watches in Switzerland. However, the family's based in America. So I think Stephen Romer, I believe, was born and raised in Switzerland, got his start working in the Swiss watch industry, moved to America, started his own brand here, and they're producing some pieces. Very high-quality watches for the price. And very impressive technical specifications for the price as well. So definitely check them out. Finally, Aquatico. They're a Chinese micro brand, and they make a lot of, kind of watches that are very similar to other classic watches. Not always direct homages, but you can usually trace the inspiration. And they make a lot of bronze watches, interesting materials, and they tend to be a very good value for the money too, as far as I've seen. So that's another interesting one to check out. All right, this video has gotten way too long, so I don't know if anybody sat through all of these or if you guys jumped through and picked and chose different things. Either way, thank you guys for watching the video. Comments down below. Ask me about other brands, and I'll try and give you my opinion on them. And fight me about what I just said down there, and I'll try to be nice. And yeah, I'm not going to get into too many arguments. But yeah, I think this is hopefully kind of a fun video. Don't take this too seriously. If you're angry at anything I said, I'm sorry. I'm new at this. I'm an idiot. Whatever. Don't yell at me. Okay. Thank you guys. We'll talk to you later. Bye.